The rain fell mercilessly on a tree-lined suburban street. Elegant homes with manicured lawns stood like silent witnesses to the scene unfolding before one particular residence. Margaret Maggie Sullivan stood motionless on the porch, rainwater streaming down her face, mixing with what might be tears. Her hands rested protectively on the shoulders of two children, twins, a boy and a girl, no more than 10 years old. Beside them, an aging golden retriever with graying muzzle pressed close to the children, as if sensing their distress. Moving men shuttled boxes from the house to a waiting truck. The front door was held open by an elegant woman in her 60s, dressed in expensive clothes that seemed impervious to the downpour. Her face was a mask of cold determination. "The house belongs to the Harrington Family Trust." Eleanor Harrington's voice cut through the rain like ice. "With James gone, your residency rights have expired." Maggie placed her hands instinctively over her swollen belly, 7 months pregnant with the child who would never know their father. The baby kicked, as if protesting this cruel eviction. 2 months had passed since James's sudden collapse at breakfast. An aneurysm, the doctor said. 2 months of grief, of trying to make sense of a world turned upside down. 2 months for the Harringtons to reveal their true colors. "Where are we supposed to go?" Maggie's voice remained steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "That's hardly our concern," Eleanor replied, her New England accent crisp and precise. She glanced at the twins. "Though, of course, Emily and Michael are welcome to stay here, where they belong, where they can receive a proper education befitting the Harrington name. We stay with Mom." Michael stepped forward, his small face set with determination beyond his years. Emily nodded silently beside him, clutching her sketchbook, James's last gift, to her chest like armor. Rusty, sensing the tension, pressed himself against Maggie's legs, his aged body still a barrier between his family and perceived threat. "You're making a mistake, Margaret." Richard Harrington emerged from the shadows of the foyer, tall and imposing in his tailored suit. "Consider what's best for the children. And your condition." His gaze flickered dismissively toward her pregnant belly. "What's best for them is staying together," Maggie answered, her voice finding strength. "We are a family. That's what James would want." "James is gone." Eleanor's voice caught slightly, the first genuine emotion she'd shown since the funeral. "And decisions must be made by those who remain." As the last of their belongings, the precious few they'd been allowed to take, were loaded into Maggie's weathered station wagon, Emily looked up at the only home she'd ever known. "Will we ever come back?" she whispered. Maggie brushed a damp curl from her daughter's forehead. "I don't know, sweetheart, but wherever we go, we'll be together." The twins climbed into the back seat with Rusty between them, the dog's loyalty unwavering despite his arthritic hips. Maggie eased her pregnant frame behind the steering wheel, looking back one last time at the Harrington mansion before driving away from the life they'd known. Have you ever had to start over when everything seemed to fall apart? Tell me where you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Martha Chen was waiting when Maggie pulled into the small diner just outside the city limits. The elderly art professor's face creased with concern as she watched the pregnant woman help her children and dog from the car. "Oh, Maggie," Martha embraced her former student carefully. "James was afraid something like this might happen." Inside, over mugs of hot chocolate for the children and herbal tea for Maggie, Martha reached into her worn leather satchel and withdrew a small envelope. "James came to see me about 3 months before." Martha paused, her eyes sliding briefly to the twins. "He asked me to give you this if certain circumstances arose. I believe those circumstances have arrived." Inside was a key and an address in Millfield, a small town about 2 hours from the city. "I don't understand." Maggie turned the key over in her palm. "Your grandmother's house," Martha said gently. "James bought it back." "That's impossible," Maggie whispered. "I sold it years ago after Gran died." How did he even know about it? You told him stories, Martha smiled sadly, about your summers there, about learning to paint in your grandmother's studio. He listened, Maggie. He always listened. The memory surfaced like a Polaroid developing slowly. Maggie curled against James in their first apartment, describing the rambling Victorian with its wraparound porch and garden full of hollyhocks. How her grandmother had taught her to mix colors in the sunroom that faced north for perfect light. How she'd sold it after college to pay off student loans, a decision that had haunted her ever since. He wanted to surprise you, Martha continued, but he also wanted a contingency plan. He worried about his parents' influence if anything happened to him. He knew, Maggie realized, her hand trembling slightly around the teacup. He knew they would do this. Martha nodded grimly. James understood his family better than anyone. He loved them, but he saw how wealth had changed them, made them value status over character. That evening, Maggie pulled up to the familiar white Victorian at the edge of Millfield. In the dying light, she could see the house needed work, peeling paint, sagging steps, but it stood solid against the darkening sky, a beacon of unexpected hope. Is this where we'll live now? Emily asked quietly. Yes, Maggie answered, surprised by the certainty in her voice. This was your great-grandmother's house. I used to spend my summers here when I was your age. The key turned smoothly in the lock, as if welcoming them home. Inside, Maggie's breath caught. Someone had been caring for the place. The floors had been swept, the windows washed. Basic furniture sat draped in sheets like patient ghosts. A stack of firewood waited beside the Riverstone fireplace. While the twins explored with Rusty hobbling excitedly behind them, Maggie ran her fingers along the familiar wainscoting until she found it. The small notch in the dining room that concealed her grandmother's secret drawer. Her fingers remembered the trick, pressing just so, and the panel slid open. Inside was an envelope, addressed in James's unmistakable handwriting. For Maggie, when you need it most. Her hands shook too badly to open it now. Instead, she tucked it into her pocket, a promise to herself for later when the children were asleep, when she could face whatever message James had left behind. Mom, Michael called from upstairs. There are 3 bedrooms, and one has 2 beds already. And there's a room with windows all around, Emily added, her voice more animated than Maggie had heard in months, with easels and paint supplies. The sunroom studio, still there after all these years. As Maggie climbed the stairs, one hand supporting her pregnant belly, she felt something she hadn't expected. Beneath the grief and uncertainty, a small flicker of possibility, like the first brushstroke on a blank canvas. 3 months later, Maggie stood at the easel in the sunroom, demonstrating brush technique to her small afternoon class. The April sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating her face as she guided her students. Remember, it's not about perfect replication, she explained, adding a deft stroke to the canvas. It's about capturing how the subject makes you feel. Her small business, art classes 3 afternoons a week, and weekend shifts at Millfield's modest gallery didn't bring in much, but combined with her diminishing savings, it kept them afloat. For now. At the kitchen table, Michael worked on math homework while Rusty dozed at his feet. The boy had grown quieter since they'd moved to Millfield, shouldering responsibility beyond his years. He checked the locks each night, kept track of his sister, and watched his mother with worried eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. Emily had retreated into art, filling her sketchbook with memories of her father, James reading bedtime stories, James teaching her to ride a bike, James laughing in the sunlight. The drawings were remarkable for a 10-year-old, capturing not just likeness, but essence. As her students filed out, Maggie caught sight of Grace Peterson making her way up the walkway, a covered dish in her weathered hands. At 85, Grace moved slowly but deliberately, her spine straight as a young sapling despite her years. Brought you some chicken and dumplings, Grace announced without preamble, stepping into the kitchen. My Henry's recipe. Man could cook like an angel, God rest him. Grace had been Maggie's grandmother's best friend, and she'd adopted the Sullivan family immediately upon their return to Millfield. Her connection to Maggie's past made her a living bridge between generations. The little one's been kicking up a storm today, Maggie said, lowering herself carefully into a chair. Good, Grace nodded approvingly. Strong babies keep you on your toes. The sound of hammering from the porch interrupted them. Sam Cooper, the local carpenter who'd been helping with repairs, was replacing the rotten boards on the steps. Widowed young with no children, Sam worked for far less than his skills were worth, claiming he happened to have extra materials lying around whenever Maggie tried to pay him properly. That man's sweet on you, Grace observed, her pale blue eyes sharp as ever. Don't be ridiculous, Maggie brushed off the comment. He's just being kind. Kindness and affection aren't mutually exclusive. Child. Since they'd arrived in Millfield, Sam had become a steady presence in their lives. He'd taught Michael to fish in the creek behind the house, showed Emily how different woods had different grains for her to sketch, and always seemed to appear with exactly what Maggie needed before she knew she needed it. A repaired banister, a freshly stocked woodpile, or simply a cup of coffee and quiet companionship on difficult mornings. James would have liked him, Maggie admitted softly, watching Sam through the window as he carefully measured a board. He valued people who could build things with their hands. Before Grace could respond, the phone rang, an unfamiliar number with the city's area code. Normally, Maggie would let such calls go to voicemail, but something made her answer. Ms. Sullivan, this is Jonathan Whitfield, representing Harrington and Associates. I'm calling regarding your children, Emily and Michael. Maggie's hand tightened on the receiver. What about my children? The Harringtons are pursuing legal action for visitation rights with the possibility of shared custody. They believe the children's best interest would be served by maintaining connection with their paternal family and the educational opportunities they can provide. The room seemed to tilt slightly. They threw us out, Maggie managed. They didn't even call on the twins' birthday. Nevertheless, they are the children's grandparents, with certain legal standing. You'll be receiving formal documentation shortly. After hanging up, Maggie braced herself against the counter, one hand protectively covering her belly. Bad news? Grace asked quietly. The Harringtons want the twins, Maggie whispered. They're taking me to court. Grace's weathered hand covered Maggie's. Then we'll just have to show them what real family looks like. Outside, Sam had stopped hammering, his expression concerned as he watched through the window. When Maggie caught his eye, he gave a small nod, a silent promise of support that somehow felt more reassuring than any words could have been. Do you think family is defined by blood ties or by who stands beside you in difficult times? Leave your thoughts in the comments section below. Catherine Palmer's office occupied the middle floor of a downtown high-rise, neither as opulent as the top-floor firms catering to the city's elite, nor as utilitarian as the storefront practices serving working-class clients. The attorney herself was a woman in her 50s with prematurely silver hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen every kind of family dispute imaginable. Thank you for coming, Ms. Sullivan, Catherine said, leading Maggie to a conference room. I understand travel is difficult in your condition. When someone says it's about James, I make the effort, Maggie replied, easing herself into a chair. Her due date was approaching, and the 2-hour drive had been uncomfortable at best. Catherine opened a folder with practiced precision. I represent the Henry Harrington Sr. Trust, a private foundation established by James's maternal grandfather. Are you familiar with Mr. Harrington Sr.? Only through stories. He died before James and I met. Henry Sr. was quite different from his son Richard. He built his fortune from nothing and never forgot where he came from. Catherine adjusted her glasses. He established this trust with explicit instructions regarding its management and eventual distribution. She slid a document across the table. 3 years ago, James was named the primary beneficiary upon reaching certain conditions set by his grandfather. Conditions involving demonstrating compassion, independent thinking, and breaking from what Henry Sr. called the family's growing obsession with status over substance. Maggie's breath caught. And did James meet these conditions? According to the trustee's evaluation, emphatically yes. James was notified of his inheritance on his 35th birthday. The trust, valued at approximately $195 million, was placed under his sole control at that time. The words hit Maggie like a physical blow. "That's impossible," she whispered. "We lived on my teaching salary and James's architect income. We budgeted for vacations. We saved for the children's education." According to our records, James established the Sullivan Foundation immediately after gaining control of the trust. He directed that the funds be used primarily for philanthropic purposes, with specific provisions for educational initiatives, community development, and healthcare access for underserved populations. Catherine's expression softened slightly. James left specific instructions regarding disclosure of the foundation and its assets. According to his directives, you were to be informed of its existence exactly 1 year after his death, provided certain conditions were met. What conditions? Separation from the Harrington family's influence, establishment of an independent household, and, I'm quoting directly from his instructions, continued commitment to the values we shared throughout our marriage, particularly regarding the children's upbringing. The realization dawned slowly. James had anticipated everything. His parents' attempt to control the children, the financial struggles that would follow, even this move to her grandmother's house in Millfield. "He engineered a test," Maggie whispered, unsure whether to feel angry or awed. "James believed deeply in your strength," Catherine clarified, her tone gentle. "In his private conversations with me, he spoke of how you'd taught him to value authenticity over appearances, creativity over conformity. He worried that his family's wealth and status consciousness might influence the children if they were raised primarily by his parents." She passed Maggie another document. "This journal entry might help you understand his thinking better." Maggie read James's familiar handwriting through blurring tears. "I've seen what wealth without wisdom does to people, how it warps priorities, creates entitlement, destroys empathy. My grandfather understood this, which is why he structured his trust the way he did. And now I must do the same for Emily and Michael. The money itself isn't important. What matters is that they learn to see value beyond price tags, to measure worth in character rather than currency." Maggie understands this instinctively. It's one of the countless reasons I love her. If anything happens to me, she'll raise our children with the right values, but only if she's free from my parents' influence and financial leverage. The trust must remain a secret until she's established her independence, until she's proven to herself what I already know, that she has everything necessary to give our children what truly matters. "And now?" Maggie asked, handing back the journal. "Now, as James's widow and the mother of his children, you become the primary trustee of the Sullivan Foundation. The children will become co-trustees upon reaching the age of 21. Until then, all decisions regarding the management and distribution of assets rest with you." As Maggie left the law office, the city streets seemed altered somehow, as if she were seeing them through a different lens. The weight of James's revelation pressed against her chest, a complex mixture of gratitude, betrayal, and disbelief. She had lived the past months in a state of near-constant financial anxiety, working multiple jobs to keep their heads above water. While a fortune waited in trust, its revelation depended on her adherence to principles she would have maintained regardless. The elevator doors opened to the lobby, and Maggie stepped out, lost in thought. She nearly collided with Eleanor Harrington. Margaret, Eleanor's voice was cool, her gaze sliding to Maggie's prominent belly. What a surprise. Is it? Maggie challenged quietly. You knew I had a meeting with Catherine Palmer today. Something flickered in Eleanor's expression, a calculation recalibrated. Richard and I would like to discuss the children's future. Perhaps over lunch? I think we've said all we need to say to each other. Eleanor's perfectly manicured hand caught Maggie's arm. You can't provide what they need, Margaret. Not on your own. Not with a new baby coming. Not in that town. The Sullivan Foundation's resources would be better directed toward ensuring the next generation of Harringtons receives every advantage. The mention of the foundation confirmed what Maggie had suspected. Eleanor already knew. The question was how much, and how she planned to use that knowledge. The children are not possessions to be claimed, Eleanor, Maggie said, gently but firmly removing the woman's hand. They're people, with their own hearts and minds. Perhaps you should ask them what they want before you try to plan their futures. As she walked away, Maggie noticed something unexpected in Eleanor's eyes. Not just the usual calculation, but a flicker of genuine loneliness, quickly masked by practiced indifference. The Millfield Community Hospital was small but well-equipped. Dr. Sarah Williams had been monitoring Maggie's pregnancy with growing concern about her blood pressure, and today's appointment had confirmed her fears. Bed rest, Maggie, Dr. Williams said firmly. Starting immediately, this preeclampsia is nothing to mess with. I can't just stop, Maggie protested. I have the twins, classes to teach, bills to pay, and a baby who needs you healthy, Sarah countered. I'm not suggesting this lightly. Outside in the waiting room, Sam Cooper had driven her to the appointment and now sat entertaining the twins with stories about the historic buildings he'd helped restore in Millfield. Your chariot awaits, milady, he announced with exaggerated formality when Maggie emerged. I need to stop at the gallery, Maggie began. No, you don't, Sam interrupted. Sarah called ahead to me while writing up your instructions. You're going straight home and to bed. Doctor's orders. Sam, I can't just... Yes, you can, he said, his voice gentler. Grace is already at your place making up the downstairs guest room, so you don't have to climb stairs. The Arts Center has found a substitute for your classes, and I've taken a couple of weeks off to help with the twins. Maggie's eyes widened. You can't afford to take time off. Your carpentry business will survive, Sam finished for her. Besides, I've been wanting to teach Michael proper fishing techniques, and Emily mentioned wanting to build birdhouses to paint. Perfect timing, I'd say. In the car, Emily leaned forward from the back seat. Can we really build birdhouses, Mr. Cooper? Absolutely. I've got some cedar scraps that would be perfect. Birds love cedar. Will you stay for dinner? Michael asked, his protective instincts temporarily forgotten in the excitement of having a project. Mom was going to make spaghetti, but she probably can't now. Michael, Maggie began, embarrassed. Spaghetti sounds great, Sam interrupted smoothly. But how about I cook? My mother's sauce recipe is pretty legendary. As he glanced at Maggie, something passed between them, an understanding deeper than words. In the 4 months since they'd moved to Millfield, Sam had become more than just a helpful neighbor. His steadfast presence, his gentle humor, his unobtrusive support had gradually woven him into the fabric of their daily lives. Thank you, Maggie said softly, for everything. Sam's smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. That's what friends do, Maggie. Real friends show up. That evening, confined to the makeshift bedroom, Maggie finally opened James's letter from the secret drawer. His familiar handwriting blurred through her tears. My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you found your way back to your grandmother's house, back to the place where your artistic spirit was first nurtured. I wish I could have given you this house as a gift while I was alive to see your face light up with recognition and memory. Instead, it becomes part of a contingency plan I pray you'll never need. I've never told you about the Sullivan Foundation or the inheritance from my grandfather. At first, it was because I wanted to prove I could make my own way without family money. Later, it was because I saw how wealth had warped my parents' values, how it had become a weapon they wielded rather than a tool they used to help others. If my parents are behaving as I fear they might, forgive me for not warning you more explicitly. I hoped I was wrong about them. I hoped they would see in you and our children what I see, not extensions of the Harrington name, but beautiful, unique souls deserving of freedom to find their own paths. Trust yourself, Maggie. You know our children. You know what matters most. The path that seems most practical may not be the one that leads them toward becoming the people we hope they'll be. You once told me that your grandmother said, "True wealth isn't measured by what's in your bank account, but by what you create with your hands and heart." She was right, and that's the legacy I want for our children. Not millions in a trust fund, but the example you set every day with your creativity, your integrity, and your compassion. All my love, always, James. A knock at the bedroom door interrupted her tears. Michael stood in the doorway, his small face solemn. "Mom, there's a lady named Mrs. Harrington at the door. She says she's our grandmother." Eleanor Harrington looked distinctly out of place in the modest living room of the Millfield house. Her designer suit and pearl necklace contrasted sharply with the comfortable but worn furniture and handmade curtains. "This is quite quaint," she observed, declining Grace's offer of tea. "It's home," Maggie replied from the doorway, ignoring Dr. Williams's orders to stay in bed. "What do you want, Eleanor?" "To make a proposal." Eleanor's gaze swept over the twins, who hovered protectively near their mother. "Richard and I have discussed the situation, and we're prepared to be reasonable." "How generous of you," Eleanor continued as if she hadn't heard the sarcasm. "The Sullivan Foundation remains under your trusteeship as James intended. In exchange, Emily and Michael attend Northbrook Academy, funded by the foundation, not by us, while continuing to live with you. They spend 2 weekends each month with us at the estate. We establish regular family dinners to maintain connections. Everyone benefits." The offer was reasonable on its surface, more reasonable than Maggie had expected. Yet something in Eleanor's too careful tone raised her suspicions. "And if I decline, then we proceed with our petition for grandparent visitation rights, potentially expanding to shared custody. Our attorneys believe we have a compelling case given the children's financial interests and the challenging circumstances of your current living situation." Her gaze flicked meaningfully toward Maggie's swollen belly. "I need to think about this," Maggie said, one hand pressed against her lower back where pain had been building all afternoon. "Of course. We'll await your decision." Eleanor rose to leave, then paused. "One more thing, Margaret. The Sullivan Foundation Board meets quarterly. The next meeting is in 2 weeks. As trustee, your presence would be expected." A thin smile. "I do hope your condition won't prevent your attendance." After Eleanor left, Maggie sank onto the sofa, suddenly dizzy. Grace brought her water, her weathered face creased with concern. "You're pale as a sheet, child." "Just tired," Maggie assured her, though the pain in her back had intensified. Sam, who had tactfully made himself scarce during Eleanor's visit, reappeared from the kitchen where he'd been helping the twins with homework. "That woman could freeze a bonfire with that tone," he muttered, sitting beside Maggie. "You okay?" "I don't know," Maggie admitted. "Her offer makes practical sense, but something feels wrong." "Mom?" Emily's voice was small. "Do we have to go to that school? Or stay with them?" "No one's making you do anything you don't want to," Maggie promised, though uncertainty gnawed at her. I don't want to go, Michael said firmly. They don't even have Rusty's food right, and they never laugh. And Sam wouldn't be there, Emily added quietly, and he makes the best pancakes. Sam's eyes widened slightly, a soft smile playing at his lips as he glanced at Maggie. The simplicity of their responses cut through the complexity clouding Maggie's thinking. While she'd been weighing educational opportunities against family values, the children were evaluating the proposal based on what actually contributed to their happiness. A sharp pain lanced through her abdomen, different from the backache, more intense, more urgent. Grace, Maggie gasped. I think the baby's coming. But you're not due for 3 weeks. Tell that to the baby. Maggie managed through gritted teeth as another contraction seized her. What followed was a blur of activity. Sam taking charge with calm efficiency. Grace directing everyone with the authority of a woman who'd witnessed birth and death for decades. The twins being reassured and entrusted to a neighbor. Too fast to get to the city, Dr. Williams decreed after examining Maggie. We're delivering here in Millfield. As they raced to the small community hospital, Maggie gripped Sam's hand. The twins are with Grace in half the neighborhood, he assured her. Focus on you and the baby now. The delivery was difficult. Preeclampsia complicated everything, sending Maggie's blood pressure dangerously high. She drifted in and out of awareness, catching fragments of urgent medical conversation. BP still rising. Need to get the baby out now. Prep for emergency C-section. Her last conscious thought was of James and how desperately she wished he were here. Maggie awoke slowly, awareness returning in layers. The antiseptic smell of hospital, the soft beeping of monitors, the dull ache of surgical incision, and then the tiny weight nestled against her chest. Her eyes fluttered open to find a small, perfect face looking back at her. A daughter. James's daughter. You had us worried there for a while, Dr. Williams said softly from the bedside. But you're both fighters. The twins. Maggie's voice was hoarse. Safe with Sam. He's been here the whole time, only stepping out to call and reassure them every hour. That man hasn't left the waiting room except to check on your children. As her vision cleared further, Maggie became aware of someone else in the room. Eleanor Harrington, standing awkwardly by the window. I'll give you some privacy, Dr. Williams said, with a meaningful glance at Eleanor. But only 5 minutes. Both of you need rest. When they were alone, Eleanor approached the bed hesitantly. She's beautiful, she said, looking at the newborn. She has James's chin. What are you doing here, Eleanor? Maggie asked, too exhausted for pretense. The elegant woman seemed to deflate slightly, years of carefully maintained composure cracking to reveal the grief beneath. When Sarah, Dr. Williams, called to say you were in distress, I was already on my way back. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you too. Losing me? Maggie repeated, confused. James loved you so completely, Eleanor's voice caught. I resented that for years. The way he looked at you. No one had ever looked at me that way. Not even Richard. She moved closer, her gaze fixed on the baby. After James died, it was easier to blame you than to face my own failures as a mother. Easier to try controlling the children than to admit I never really knew my own son. Yet here you are, trying to take his children. I'm trying to hold on to what's left of him, Eleanor corrected, a single tear escaping. But I'm doing it all wrong, aren't I? For the first time, Maggie saw beyond the polished facade to the grieving mother beneath. A woman who had lost her only child and was desperately grasping at whatever connection remained. They're your grandchildren, Eleanor, Maggie said gently. You don't need court orders or boarding schools to be part of their lives. You just need to see them for who they are, not who you want them to be. Before Eleanor could respond, the door burst open. Emily and Michael rushed in, followed by Sam carrying an enormous teddy bear, Grace with a handmade quilt, and what seemed like half the town bearing flowers, food, and gifts. "Mom! The baby!" Emily exclaimed, peering at her new sister with wonder. "Is she okay? Are you okay?" Michael demanded, his small face pinched with worry. "We're both perfect," Maggie assured them, shifting to make room as they climbed carefully onto the bed. "Meet your sister, Hope." Eleanor stepped back, watching as the Millfield community surrounded Maggie and the children with warmth and genuine affection. Her expression shifted from surprise to something more complicated, recognition perhaps, of what true family looked like. She observed Sam Cooper, the way he hovered protectively near Maggie, the gentle manner in which he interacted with the twins, the obvious affection in his eyes. He wasn't James, would never be James, but he clearly cared deeply for this family. Richard Harrington arrived an hour later, bristling with impatience. "Eleanor, what is going on? You were supposed to get an answer about our proposal." The room fell silent. Eleanor looked at her husband, then at the scene before her. Maggie with the baby, the twins curled protectively at her side, the neighbors who had become extended family. "There's no need for proposals or court cases, Richard," she said quietly. "Have you lost your mind? This is about the children's future." "Yes, it is," Eleanor agreed. "And their future is right here, with their mother in this community that clearly loves them." Richard stared at his wife in disbelief. "Look at this place. These people. This isn't what James would have wanted for his children." Actually, Eleanor withdrew a small leather journal from her purse. "It's exactly what he wanted." She opened the journal. James's journal, Maggie realized with a start. "I found this in his study," Eleanor explained. "He wrote about Millfield, about your grandmother's house, about wanting the children to experience a community where people valued each other for who they were, not what they owned." Richard's face hardened. Sentimental nonsense. What about their education, their opportunities, their legacy? "Their legacy is right here," Eleanor countered, her voice strengthening. "In the values they're learning, in the community that supports them, in the mother who puts their happiness above appearances." For a moment, the two locked eyes in silent battle. Decades of marital power dynamics shifting in real time. Then, to everyone's surprise, Richard's shoulders slumped slightly. "We've lost him, haven't we?" he asked, his voice suddenly old and tired. "We lost him long before the aneurysm." "Not completely," Eleanor said more gently. "We have his children. If we're willing to be the grandparents they need, not the ones we think they should have." Over the following weeks, as Maggie recovered and baby Hope grew stronger, a fragile new understanding began to form between the Harringtons and the Sullivan household. Richard remained stiff and formal, but made hesitant efforts to connect with his grandchildren on their terms, asking about Emily's art, listening to Michael's detailed explanations of the fishing techniques Sam had taught him. Eleanor underwent the more dramatic transformation. She visited regularly, bringing thoughtful gifts rather than extravagant ones. She asked Grace about Millfield's history and Sam about his carpentry. Most importantly, she watched and listened to the twins, beginning to know them as individuals rather than extensions of the Harrington name. 2 years later, the Millfield Community Arts Center gleamed in the summer sunlight, its newly renovated Victorian facade a testament to what partnership and vision could achieve. Inside, the grand opening celebration was in full swing. Local artists displayed their work, children participated in workshops, and the community gathered to celebrate. Maggie stood in the central gallery, now named the James Harrington Sullivan Memorial Gallery, watching her children with quiet pride. Emily, nearly 13 now, was helping younger children with an art project, her natural teaching ability already evident. Michael led tours of the building, proudly explaining how it had been adapted from the Old Town Library, and little Hope toddled after them both, a curly-haired whirlwind of energy. "Quite a legacy," Eleanor observed, joining Maggie by the refreshment table. The past 2 years had softened her, both physically and emotionally. Her designer suits had given way to more casual attire, and the rigid posture of control had relaxed into something more genuine. James would be proud, Maggie agreed, not just of the building, but of how it came to be. The Arts Center represented the first major collaboration between the Sullivan Foundation and the Harrington family, a bridge built between two worlds that had once seemed irreconcilable. Eleanor had surprised everyone by purchasing a small cottage in Millfield 6 months after Hope's birth, declaring she wanted to be close to her grandchildren. Richard visited on weekends, gradually warming to the small-town pace and the unconventional extended family that had formed around his grandchildren. Sam Cooper appeared, now officially Maggie's partner, after a year of careful courtship that had won the twins' enthusiastic approval. As he wrapped an arm around Maggie's waist, Eleanor watched them with genuine warmth rather than the judgment she once would have shown. Richard is in the children's workshop being taught how to make a pinch pot by a very determined 5-year-old, Sam reported with amusement. He's taking it extremely seriously. He approaches everything like a business proposal, Eleanor sighed, though her tone was affectionate. Even play. He's trying, Maggie acknowledged. That matters. Grace, now 87 but still sharp as ever, joined them, leaning on her cane. In her free hand was a worn leather-bound book. This was your grandmother's, she told Maggie, handing her the book. Her recipe book, though it was more than that. She wrote down her thoughts, her little bits of wisdom between the instructions for pie crust and bread. Maggie opened it carefully, recognizing her grandmother's flowing script. On the first page was an inscription. The truest wealth passes not through bank accounts, but through hands and hearts, generation to generation. What we create, what we nurture, what we build together, this is the legacy worth more than gold. As Maggie looked around the room, at her children, at Eleanor showing Hope how to hold a paintbrush, at Richard learning to loosen his tie and get clay on his hands, at Sam quietly supporting it all with his steady presence, she knew this was exactly the legacy James had envisioned. Not millions in a trust fund, though that had made much of it possible, but the values that money couldn't buy: compassion, integrity, creativity, and the courage to begin again when life demands it. Thank you, James, she whispered to the space where she still sometimes felt his presence. For everything. Sometimes the greatest challenges in life open doors to paths we never dared to dream. Like Maggie, we all have the capacity to rebuild after loss and to find true value not in possessions, but in love, community, and the courage to begin again. Do you have a story about starting over? Share in the comments below. I'll see you tomorrow with another story that touches the heart.